broad daylight, gunfire erupted repeatedly as law enforcement closed in on a ruthless assassin. The suspect was believed to be the one who murdered a high-profile Texas prosecutor, Mark Hasse. In his desperate attempt to escape, the suspect fiercely fired back, but outnumbered and overpowered, he was shot and killed instantly. The suspect was down, but one question remained. Was he truly Mark Hasse's killer? 7 weeks earlier, on the morning of January 31st, 2013, Mark Hasse was ambushed as he walked toward the courthouse. A masked gunman fired 5 shots before speeding away in a Ford sedan, leaving the prosecutor motionless on the ground. Despite receiving quick first aid and being rushed to the hospital, Prosecutor Mark Hasse tragically died shortly after the attack. The murder of Prosecutor Mark Hasse sent shockwaves through the community and law enforcement. The police knew this wasn't just a random act of violence, it was an execution, a targeted hit on a prominent prosecutor. The police swiftly secured the courthouse area, establishing a perimeter to preserve evidence and prevent tampering. Officers began interviewing witnesses, gathering descriptions of the shooter and the getaway vehicle. Following the murder, District Attorney Mike McLelland made a public statement vowing that those responsible for the crime would be caught.
I hope that the people that did this are watching, because we're very confident that we're going to find you, we're going to pull you out of whatever hole you're in, and we're going to bring you back and let the people of Kaufman County prosecute you to the fullest extent of the law.
With that being said, Kaufman County and surrounding areas increased security around courthouses, while law enforcement agencies across the state heightened their alert in case a larger threat to local officials emerged. Initially, investigators believed that the killing might be linked to one of the criminals Mark Hasse had prosecuted in the past. Given the nature of the shooting and the targeted nature of the crime, authorities suspected revenge as a possible motive. Just 2 months later, another law enforcement officer was shot, and the police believed the masked killer who had targeted Mark Hasse had struck again. On March 21, 2013, Deputy James Boyd was conducting a routine traffic stop in Wise County, Texas. As he approached the black 1991 Cadillac DeVille, he had no idea that this stop would lead to a violent encounter with one of the most dangerous criminals on the run. Without warning, Deputy Boyd was ambushed. The shooter fired 3 shots, 2 to the chest and 1 to the head. As Boyd lay on the ground, struggling to process the attack, he blacked out. A passerby saw him in distress and stopped to help. Backup was quickly called, and fortunately, Deputy Boyd survived. While Boyd received medical attention, officers from multiple jurisdictions immediately launched a manhunt to track down the shooter. The shooter drove at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, weaving through traffic in a reckless manner. Smoke from his engine clouded the officers' view, but they successfully kept him in sight, maintaining a steady distance. The chase continued as the suspect exited the highway and entered the streets of Wise County. At one point, an 18-wheeler collided with the shooter's car, severely damaging it. The chase ended and the shooter staggered out of the wreckage. He opened fire against the pursuing officers.
In response, the officers returned fire.
In a brief exchange, the suspect was struck multiple times and was found dead at the scene. The police quickly identified the shooter as Evan Ebel, a dangerous member of the 2111 crew, a violent prison gang. Ebel had been mistakenly released from prison just 2 months earlier due to a mix-up in his court records. As investigators dug deeper into Ebel's background, they discovered unsettling similarities between his case and the murder of Mark Hasse. Before shooting Deputy Boyd, Ebel killed a Domino's delivery driver, Nathan Leon, and took his uniform. Posing as the driver, he arrived at the home of Tom Clements, the executive director of the Colorado Department of Corrections. When Clements opened the door, Ebel shot him dead. However, Ebel's killing spree wasn't supposed to end there. Inside Ebel's Cadillac, authorities discovered key evidence: Nathan Leon's Domino's uniform, directions to Tom Clements' house, a manifesto filled with his hatred for the prison system, and a hit list of other prison officials. This immediately raised red flags, as a similar shooting targeting high-profile officials had occurred. Attorney Mike McLelland and his colleagues suspected that Evans' ties to the 211 crew and his hit list might be linked to Mark's murder, but further investigation was needed to confirm the connection. Unfortunately, before attorney Mike McLelland could uncover the truth, he and his wife were shot at their own home.
Attorney for Kaufman County and his wife found shot to death in their home. This comes just 2 months after one of his top prosecutors was murdered right outside of the courthouse. So the big question this morning, are these two shootings connected?
On March 30th, 2013, the bodies of Kaufman County District Attorney Mike McLelland and his wife were found in their home. A concerned family member, unable to reach them, went to their residence to check and discovered the couple dead, both shot multiple times. The scene was horrific, with the couple lying on the floor, blood pooled around their bodies. With Evan Ebel dead, but the attacks on prosecutors continuing, police knew the threat wasn't gone. The real mastermind was still out there. Was this the work of a lone killer, or was a larger group behind these executions? As news of the McLelland murders spread, the case gained urgency. As news of the McLelland murders spread, hundreds of investigators joined the case, and tips flooded in from the public. But one tip stood out from the rest. An enormous email came in on the night of Easter Sunday and contained just a few chilling words. Though the exact wording was not disclosed, police later reported that the email sender claimed responsibility for the murders of Mike McLelland and his wife. The sender provided specific details about the crimes and warned of more attacks unless Judge Woods made one of Kaufman County's main judges resign. Hoping to gather more information, investigators decided to engage with the sender. They acknowledged the demands but pointed out that much of the case had already been covered by the media. To determine if the sender was truly the killer, law enforcement requested specific details that only the perpetrator would know. However, after this exchange, the communications stopped. Investigators were left questioning whether this was a genuine threat from the murderer or just a hoax designed to throw them off. At the time, they also considered the possibility that the email was linked to Evan Ebel's white supremacist gang, the 211 crew. But with no further contact, they were left in the dark. Authorities still feared the possibility of more gang-related violence. Detectives worked around the clock, desperate to find anything that could lead them to Mike and Cynthia's killer. While reviewing surveillance footage from businesses near the McLelland home, they spotted a white Ford Crown Victoria speeding through the streets. While reviewing surveillance footage near the McLelland home, investigators caught a white Ford Crown Victoria speeding through the streets. This car was nearly identical to the one that had vanished from the scene after Mark Hasse was shot. At the same time, another team of investigators was digging through past cases involving both Mike McLelland and Mark Hasse. That's when a new suspect emerged, former Justice of the Peace and Masonic Lodge member, Eric Williams. Eric Williams was known for his intelligence, but his reputation was ruined by allegations of misconduct and unethical behavior. In 2011, he foolishly stole computers, unaware that security cameras had recorded his every move. Ultimately, his actions led to his arrest and conviction for felony theft. During his interrogation, Eric Williams insisted he had permission to take the courthouse computers. However, investigators showed him surveillance footage and witness reports proving otherwise. When asked why he took them, he gave vague answers. Police believed he wanted access to legal records, but he never admitted it. Eric was given a chance to avoid a felony conviction, a plea deal that would have reduced his charges to a misdemeanor. But he refused the offer, choosing to fight the case in court instead. The prosecution, led by Mark Hasse and Mike McLelland, took the case to trial, where Eric was ultimately found guilty. During the trial, Mark Hasse reportedly called Williams a disgrace to the justice system and accused him of abusing his position for personal gain. He painted Williams as an arrogant man who thought he was above the law. McLelland was just as harsh, reportedly saying that Williams was nothing more than a common thief in a robe. They eventually sentenced Williams 2 years of probation. But the real blow wasn't the punishment, it was the label. As a convicted felon, he lost his position as Justice of the Peace and his law license was revoked. For a proud man like Williams, this humiliation was not easily forgotten. The police quickly brought Eric in for an interview. Following his attorney's advice, he refused to cooperate. However, while he stayed silent with investigators, he had no problem speaking to the media, eagerly sharing his opinions throughout the case.
My heart goes out to all the families that have been affected by this tragedy, and especially to the people that work at the courthouse. I worked there for several years while I was going to law school, and so I know that it's a tight-knit family and that this is devastating to them.
What's it make you feel like knowing that you've been somehow wrapped up in this?
It actually makes me feel that the police are doing the thorough job they need to.
While Eric bounced between media interviews, investigators kept digging, convinced he was their prime suspect. But to their surprise, there was no record of him ever owning a white Crown Victoria. Then, on April 11th, 12 days after the McLelland murders, everything changed. Eric suddenly fired his attorneys and contacted the authorities, offering to cooperate. Detectives wasted no time and rushed to his home for an interview.
And you understand why your name pops up in all this?
Absolutely.
Well, did you have anything to do with it?
No, absolutely not.
It was no surprise that he firmly denied any involvement in the murders. During the interviews, police learned that for 2 years after losing his law license, Eric Williams had been making a living by selling firearms. As a convicted felon, it was illegal for him to own or sell guns. However, without probable cause, detectives couldn't legally search his home unless he willingly gave them permission.
I guess we could just look in there real quick.
With the faintest smirk on his face, Eric Williams agreed to the search without hesitation, confident he had covered his tracks. However, as investigators combed through his home, they uncovered various weapon attachments and tactical gear. When asked about the missing firearms, Williams claimed he had sold all but one of his 16 guns, which he insisted was no longer in his possession. Detectives weren't convinced, especially since his house was still filled with weapon accessories. Among his belongings, investigators also found a taser. While it wasn't enough to charge him on its own, it reinforced suspicions that Williams was both dangerous and deceptive. He had previously claimed to have sold nearly all of his firearms, yet he still possessed a taser and various firearm attachments. If he was truly disarming himself, why keep these items? To investigators, this suggested that Williams was not being truthful and remained prepared for violence despite his claims. Though the police had no solid lead to bring Eric Williams in for interrogation, they secured a search warrant for his home. On April 12, 2013, Kaufman County investigators and the FBI joined forces and searched Eric Williams' home, determined to uncover solid evidence. What they found was even more than they had ever expected. In Eric Williams' garage, investigators uncovered a filing cabinet containing the registration for a white Ford Crown Victoria, the same type of car seen near the murder scenes. This discovery directly linked Williams to the vehicle used in the attacks. But that wasn't the only damning find. Inside the same cabinet, investigators found a scrap of paper with login details for an anonymous tip website. When they accessed the account, their suspicions were confirmed. Williams had been using the site to send taunting messages to law enforcement, attempting to manipulate and mislead the investigation. One message even claimed responsibility for the murders, proving that Williams not only sought revenge, but also took pleasure in toying with the authorities hunting him. This evidence strengthened the case against him, and authorities arrested 46-year-old Eric Williams, charging him with making a terroristic threat. At this point, he hadn't been officially named a suspect in the murders, but that was about to change. Roger, a former friend of Eric Williams from their time in the Texas State Guard, unknowingly played a role in Williams' deadly plans. In November 2012, Williams convinced Roger to rent a storage unit under his name, keeping his own identity off the records. At the time, Roger had no idea what Williams intended to use it for. However, after hearing that police had searched Williams' home, Roger grew suspicious. Realizing he might have been used as a pawn in something far more sinister, he immediately contacted law enforcement. His tip led investigators straight to the storage unit, where they uncovered a trove of damning evidence that would further cement Williams's guilt. Inside the storage unit sat the missing white Ford Crown Victoria, the same car used by the prosecutor's killer. But that was just the beginning. The unit was packed with police uniforms, badges, bulletproof vests, and an arsenal of deadly weapons: knives, a crossbow, multiple firearms, and enough ammunition to arm a small militia. But the most disturbing discovery? Pickle jars filled with homemade napalm. Investigators sent several firearms for forensic testing, along with a stray bullet found in a separate bag. When the test results came back, the bullet was matched to shell casings from the murder scenes, confirming it had been ejected from the same kind of gun that killed Mike McLelland and his wife. However, none of the recovered firearms could be definitively linked to the murders. It was a frustrating setback, but not a roadblock. Prosecutors refused to back down. The case was building, and they were determined to move forward. For months, Eric Williams had believed he was untouchable, but now, justice was closing in fast. By April 18, 2013, the weight of justice came crashing down on Eric Williams. He was officially charged with 3 counts of capital murder. In cases like his, the trial was divided into 2 critical phases: the guilt phase, where a jury determined if he was guilty or innocent, and the penalty phase, where they decided if he would receive the death sentence. The guilt phase began in December 2014, but prosecutors focused on just one charge: the murder of Mike McLelland's wife. It was a calculated move. If something went wrong in this trial, they still had 2 more chances to convict him. The prosecution wasted no time painting Williams as a calculated killer driven by revenge. They detailed his attempts to taunt law enforcement and his belief that he could outsmart the system. Surveillance footage from his storage unit helped lay out a chilling timeline. At 6 a.m., a white Ford Crown Victoria entered the facility. 12 minutes later, it was gone. By 6:42 a.m., Mike and Cynthia McLelland were dead. By 7 a.m., the car was back in the unit, and 17 minutes later, a black SUV left the scene. The defense, however, had a different strategy. They pointed to the weaknesses in the prosecution's case: no murder weapon, no eyewitness placing Williams at the McLelland home. They believed this was enough to create reasonable doubt. They were so confident, in fact, that they called no witnesses of their own. But the final decision wasn't in the hands of the attorneys. It was up to the jury. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, they reached a verdict.
We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Eric Lyle Williams, guilty of capital murder as charged in the indictment.
With the guilty verdict secured, the trial moved to the penalty phase, where the prosecution presented damning testimony. Kim Williams, Eric's wife and alleged getaway driver, had been arrested alongside him in 2013. Initially, she defended her husband during her interrogation, but eventually her resolve broke and she revealed everything to the detectives. In exchange for a plea deal, she agreed to testify against Eric during the penalty phase. Kim described Eric's obsession with revenge, his meticulous planning, and his disturbing lack of remorse. He had planned the McLelland murders down to the smallest detail, even dressing as law enforcement to avoid suspicion. On the night before the attack, he had shown Kim his disguise, a bulletproof vest with sheriff printed across the front. Kim also revealed that McLelland's wife wasn't the intended target, but she had to die because Eric didn't want to leave any witnesses alive. To him, she was simply collateral damage. When Kim was asked how Eric had described McLelland's wife's death, her response was chilling.
He told me that he had to shoot her an extra time because she was still moaning.
Eric Williams' cold-blooded nature didn't stop there. Later that night, after brutally murdering Mike and Cynthia McLelland, Eric and his wife celebrated at her parents' house, grilling steaks as if nothing had happened. During the trial, the jury was stunned to learn about the murder of Assistant District Attorney Mark Hasse. Kim, who had been complicit in the crime, admitted that she was behind the wheel when Eric gunned Hasse down in broad daylight. When asked why she had agreed to drive, her answer was chillingly simple. I was so drugged up, and I believed in Eric. His anger was my anger. She described their escape after the murder, noting that as they drove away, Eric was elated, and she felt the same sense of satisfaction. Kim's testimony went on to reveal even darker secrets. She recounted one night when Eric had taken her to a bridge and tossed a bag into the lake below. That bag, which was recovered after a 7-month search, turned out not to be a bag at all. It was a Halloween mask. The very same mask Eric had worn when he murdered Hasse. Inside it, police discovered 2 revolvers, one of which was confirmed to be the murder weapon used in the killing of Hasse. But perhaps the most terrifying revelation came when Kim disclosed that Eric wasn't finished with his rampage. He had a hit list, and a judge was next on it. Eric had plans to make the next murder personal. He told Kim that he intended to use a crossbow to kill Judge Glenn Ashworth. Eric planned to carve a hole into Ashworth's stomach and pour something inside. When asked what the something was, Kim hesitated before answering. It was acid, Eric had said. Despite the defense's attempt to counter with character witnesses, the damage was done. The jury had heard everything, and the truth of Eric Williams' cold-blooded actions was laid bare. On December 17, 2014, Eric Williams was sentenced to death by lethal injection. As of November 2024, Eric Williams remains on death row, still appealing his conviction. Kim Williams, who pleaded guilty to the murder of Mark Hasse, is serving a 40-year prison sentence. Justice was served, but the scars from Eric Williams' reign of terror would forever haunt the Kaufman County community. What are your thoughts on this case? We'd love to hear your opinions in the comment section below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.